Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 20th, 2009. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, home brewer Ricky Klein stops by on his trip across the country to share his freestyle brewing philosophy. Ricky has been inspired by accounts of ancient brewers brewing with what they had on hand and not being constrained by established styles, and he shares 3 very interesting beers with us. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter, my username, Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook. And if you become a fan of the show there, I'll be sending out occasional notices when shows are posted. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us. And click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on the site, too. And speaking of Brew Your Own magazine, Chris Colby has posted the details of our next BYO-BBR collaborative experiment, that is, yeast pitching rates. You can check that out on his blog at byo.com, and I'll post a link directly to that post in the description of this episode on basicbrewing.com. But here's the experiment in a nutshell, and we hope that you participate. Our question that we're trying to answer is, does pitching rate affect the fermentation and character of home-brewed beer? So the procedure is essentially this. Brew a batch of wort and divide it into 3 parts. In one part, you pitch the recommended amount of yeast, and we're using Jamil Zainashev's pitching calculator on MrMalty.com as a standard benchmark. And in the 2 other parts, we're pitching a quarter of the amount of yeast recommended and 4 times the amount of yeast. That way, we can check results like fermentation lag time, attenuation, flavor characteristics, etc., to see if pitching rate does indeed make a difference on the homebrew scale. I've always wondered that, and now we're going to see. I'm planning to brew a barley wine for the experiment, hoping to do it this week, because I think that will show any differences fairly easily. But you can brew any style you like if you participate, and I hope you do. And we want you to participate. The deadline is September 30th, and that will give us 6 weeks to conduct our experiments and collect the data. And I'll be posting a form on basicbrewing.com for you to report your results as we get closer to the deadline, and I'll let you know when that form is out there. So, warm up your brew pot, sanitize your fermenters, and join us. You'll get a mention here on the show and in print in an upcoming issue. I always say episode. It's an issue of Brew Your Own magazine. Again, check out Chris Colby's blog on byo.com for the complete details on the procedure. It's pretty straightforward, so I think I'm hoping that we'll get some good results. Looking forward to it. Can't wait. If you haven't checked for the latest episode of Basic Brewing Video, you might want to do so. Steve and I visited Firestone Walker Brewery when we were in California, and we got a great interview with Matt Brennelson, the head brewer, and we got footage of their process of primary fermentation in American oak barrels. Very cool stuff. And we certainly appreciate Matt and Jamie Smith for the hospitality that they showed us while we were out there. Definitely worth a visit if you're down around Paso Robles. Let's look into the mailbag, and we start this week with a mystery that maybe you can help solve. Dan from Dunmore, Pennsylvania writes, in the musty summer of northeastern Pennsylvania, one needs a dehumidifier in their basement to remove the dampness. It seems after I removed all the other culprits, wife spilled it, neighbor's kid drank it, vermin. Perhaps I really only made a 4-ounce batch. Oh, that's another possible culprit, that the dehumidifier drank my mead. Dan says, I made a 1-gallon batch of sweet mead, and apparently the stopper came loose. In about 2 weeks, I lost most of the batch. Only about 1/4 of the mead I started with is left. The weird thing, besides the high efficiency of my dehumidifier, is that what was left was not concentrated honey, but a mildly bitter, watery liquid. Likely infection due to water out, air in, Dan says. The mead had fermented for about 4 weeks before going into the basement, and 2 weeks afterwards to no more mead. Sigh, says Dan. Well, sigh indeed. That is weird. Most of his mead disappeared, and he's blaming his dehumidifier. Have you heard of this? If the stopper, unstops in a bottle of mead, is it going to go away? A little fermenter? Is it the dehumidifier that sucked the mead through the open stopper, or is it a more traditional culprit like the neighbor or the neighbor's kid sneaking into the basement? Very odd. If you've experienced anything like this, please let me know. Or if you think you know a scientific explanation of what happened to the mead. Very bizarre. Here's a question from Ted in Woodland Hills, California. Ted asks, I know there is no good workaround for not brewing clean, but I'm curious about any pasteurization methods once the beer is in the bottle. I still naturally carbonate by adding additional sugar, but once it's where I want it to be, can I carefully heat the bottle to kill any wild yeasts or bacteria? Wondering if you or any listeners have any experience in this. I'm trying to keep my beers longer and longer for contests, and occasionally they do have contaminations. Well, Ted, you're right. There is no substitute for good cleaning and sanitization techniques. I've never tried to pasteurize after bottling, but I'd have a couple of concerns. First off, I'd be afraid that the bottle might burst from the heat, especially if there is any carbonation in the bottle. And second, I'd be afraid that the heat would affect the flavor and aroma of the beer. You might damage some of those volatile chemicals and compounds in there that make the beer so good. My advice is that if you are having sanitization problems, I advise you to fix the issues before you bottle rather than come back afterwards and try to kill the buggies then. However, if there is anybody out there who has successfully pasteurized homebrew in the bottle, please drop me a line and let me know. Maybe there's something I don't know. You can get in touch with me at james@basicbrewing.com or by using the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Okay. Well, several weeks ago, I got an email from Ricky Klein saying he was traveling across country on a move and would be driving through our neck of the woods here in northwest Arkansas. We had tried a couple of Ricky's beers on the video side, Steve and I did, and we liked them. They were tasty, and they used some interesting ingredients. Ricky said he had 3 beers with him that were examples of his philosophy of brewing without the constraints of styles, and brewing with ingredients that were at hand. So, with that knowledge, I phoned up Steve Wilkes and Andy Sparks, and we got together for a tasting and a talk. We're here back in the space where Basic Brewing Radio was born, these many years ago, back in the back room of Andy's homebrew shop, thehomebrewery.com. Joining Steve Wilkes.
Hi, James and company.
And Andy Sparks, the proprietor.
Hey, James. I'm glad to be here.
And Ricky Klein on the way across country. We've mentioned Ricky on at least the video podcast. Ricky has sent us, was it a dandelion Kolsch and the maple barley wine?
Yep.
So welcome, Ricky.
Thank you. It's good to be here and nice not to be driving.
And Bobby's in the background.
Say hi.
Hello, good to be here.
Bobby's playing designated driver today. We have 1,200 more miles to go.
Oh, wow. Not today, I hope.
No.
But tell us while we're here. We are tasting some special beers.
Yeah, so a little while ago, I got sick of following recipes and started brewing as if they would brew 500, 600 years ago. Sometimes I'd follow recipes that I heard on the street, that is to say at homebrew shops, not things I heard on the streets of Berkeley, and basically whatever was close at hand, following what I knew of, grew it, common brewing ingredients in different parts of the world. So we'll be tasting 3 beers, actually one's a Metheglin Braggot. It's a mead made with a large amount of dark malt and also a variety of spices. We'll talk about that one more later. But instead of going light to dark, since 2 of them are fairly similar, one is malt with a bit of honey, the other's honey with a bit of malt, we'll break them up. So,
Well, cool.
So, just for clarity, these are not necessarily recipes that a monk would have brewed in the Middle Ages. This is your take on how a monk would have brewed in the Middle Ages.
Basically, yes. One of them I followed what I knew to be common ingredients in Scotland in a particular time period. The recipe is my own, and all an approximation. I guess ahead of time I should say, all of the recipes I give you are approximations because I used to save my recipes on a computer before a crash, which is a great time to plug the 2009 Brewer's Logbook from basicbrewing.com. They do not crash unless they are in fire or a dog gets a handle on them.
Very good. Yes. You can always put your recipes in the computer afterwards. That's my theory, at least. Well, what are we going to start off with?
All right. The first beer is my 2009 Christmas beer. It is an old Scottish style. It came out to about 9.8% alcohol by volume. It has heather honey, that is to say heather tips was the first thing. A little bit of ginger, which I really don't pick up. About a half ounce of ginger in a 5-gallon batch. As for steeping grains, it was 2 ounces of chocolate malt, 2 ounces of Crystal 40, and I know something else, but my long-lost hard drive died with that information. 1 ounce of East Kent Goldings at 60 minutes, and 1 ounce at 30, just for its preservative properties, basically. And this was an extract brew, dark malt extract, I think 9 pounds and 3 pounds of that heather honey. So a big beer.
Cool. Well, let's get it open. Drum roll.
Yeah. Very light carbonation, which would have been common back then, since a beer like this probably would have been brewed up in large vats, and you would have just dipped it out by cup. I did put in priming sugar, and I probably, if I wanted carbonation, should have pitched some fresh yeast, probably a different type of yeast, because I think I used a Scottish ale variety from, I think it was Y yeast, one of their Scottish ale things. But, yeah, so.
Wow. It smells mapley.
Yeah, I get a lot of kind of like sherry notes, kind of wine, alcohol smells.
Yep. When we first tasted it I guess this has been in bottle for 10 months now. And when we first tasted it, it was high alcohols through the roof. Just so sharp, unpleasant, not fun to drink, and to see the mellowing process has been really exciting to see those sharper notes being incorporated.
I get a little almost a burnt sugar bitterness when I'm at the back end. Yeah. What sort of other things did you use to bitter this with, I guess?
My guess is it was probably malt bitterness. Some of the grain escaped the grain bag and settled to the bottom, and I'm guessing what we're tasting is, I used direct heat, it was gas, just a gas stove, and probably some caramelization from that.
What do you think, Steve?
Well, one, I think it's really nice. It's real pleasant to drink, and no, it's not carbonated, but that's okay. I get some really nice honey notes out of it. At first I didn't, but so it's kind of gotten on my palate. I can really taste the honey, and it's nice.
Now, what are some tips that you can give brewers who are wanting to approach brewing from this vein?
Well, there are lots of books out there. Randy Mosier talks about just going out and doing and being excited. Every homebrewer you talk to will talk about being excited, but we're a fairly frightened people. We're worried of bugs. We're worried about sanitation process, as we should be. But there's a certain level of not being afraid it's just a 5-gallon batch. Or you can do small batch. One of these is a small batch because it was extremely experimental. And I don't know if something could be more experimental than experimental, but this was. Just throw ingredients in. Do small batches. Do large batches and suck it up and drink it, or don't be afraid to pour it down the drain. One thing I plan on doing with this is come Christmas this year, I want to do the freezing technique you've seen on Basic Brewing before and turn it into a kind of liqueur, because I would put this over ice cream in the winter.
Yeah, this would be perfect for that because it's not very hoppy. And from the reports I'm getting from people who have tried this, the ice beer technique, the hoppier beers don't fare well. Yeah. Where'd you get your heather tips? And
they in my homebrew store that I had out in Berkeley, California, where I brewed this. They just had it was one of the brewer's ingredients things. Yeah. Though in the spring in Berkeley, you can find heather tips out on the street. There are plants all over.
Huh. Among other things on the street, I
yes.
guess.
Absolutely.
Well, this is very nice. It's got a kind of a molassesy, kind of brown sugary. It's not heavy, in my opinion. Whereas you would maybe expect a beer with a whole lot of extract to be kind of syrupy because of residual sugars left over. This doesn't hit me like that at all, and I don't get the alcohol.
Which is the big change from about 4 months ago. The sugar and the alcohol, that's all there was. What I'm finding now is I expected to have the heather on the nose, and I'm getting it on the palate. I'm tasting the heather more than, and I don't know if anyone here has ever chewed on heather. It's got an almost rosemary-ish floral kind of component. But, all you got was that brown sugar molasses thing on the nose, on the palate, and those alcohols that you didn't want to drink more than a bottle. Well, you never want to drink more than a bottle of this, but yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions. Is what is heather, and what do you get from it? But rosemary,
they are actually very closely related and biologically. And walking down the street, if you see rosemary in bloom and heather in bloom, you can't really tell the difference without smelling them. Different varieties will look more alike than others. So,
are they substitutable in any way?
Not really. Heather doesn't have that herbal spiciness that we would use for roasting lamb, where you'd really want to incorporate it. Heather's just, it's definitely known for its flower, for its sweet kind of smell that you get from it, and it theoretically has some antiseptic properties as well, which is why it was used in so much Scottish ale, and why I used it here and in one of my other beers that doesn't have hops at all.
That was going to be another question. Was would you substitute it for hops? Would you just forgo the hops altogether?
I don't know if this is one of those areas of experimentation. I wasn't brave enough to make this without hops, though that's probably how it would have been made. The beer will have, the Methicillin Braggot doesn't have any, and we'll see how that's holding up. But there are a lot of things out there that can be used to replace hops. One important difference between modern beer and beer classically is that it didn't need to last years and years and years and years, and it did not need to taste the same. That's one big thing, is that you had a family recipe, and just like every single cut of steak tastes slightly differently, even if you prepare it on the same grill, that's what beer back then was like. And that's something I think a lot of homebrewers appreciate, is that every beer you make is going to be distinct. It's going to be a varietal, for lack of a better term.
And back then they brewed for subsistence, maybe, and didn't expect the beer to last. Didn't expect the beer to be cellared. So yeah. If you make a small batch of beer, you drink it.
Yeah,
essentially.
Exactly. And everyone would have brewed at home, at their own home, for most of history, that was a big deal. Though you had pubs as old as 3,000, 4,000 years. We know there were specialists, just like there have always been bakers, even though everyone baked at home. So you really were it was very proprietary. You very well may have used barley from your own backyard, which Chris Colby will be doing soon, I believe.
Yeah. And so part of your approach is to kind of use things that are around, right? And just use things that are available as if they would have back hundreds of years ago.
When we get to the metheglin braggot, that we'll have a discussion about that, because I actually went out and found things in my neighborhood.
Oh, well, are we ready to move on to that, or is that going to be the third?
That'll
beer?
be the third one.
Oh, okay. Well, what have we've got? I think Andy's fixed us up with some water and a rinse bucket. I don't have anything to dump in the dump bucket, but I'll rinse. This is exciting. I like trying new things.
These are new old things.
New old things, yeah, that's right. And things that these beers may not exist anywhere else on the planet. So
the other day I was at Three Needs Brewery in Burlington, Vermont, where I'm currently living, and they had lambic up there, and I thought, everyone's playing around with a lot of the big breweries, and the guy brought me out a 12-ounce glass of it, and he said, so this was laid down 11 years ago. And this guy, he was experimenting around. He used some, I don't know his process, but he had some imported buggies and some wild yeast, theoretically, and he put it in keg, and they're, I think, down to 3 kegs left or something unfortunate like that. But, yeah, it was really exciting to have something and say, there are only a couple other places that I could get this in the U.S., and one of these things, no one is trying. I don't know if anyone's really selling beers out there without hops in it.
Yeah. Well, actually, we had a beer. And I wish I could remember the name of the brewer. He'll be on the he'll be on the Pro Night video, which will be out by the time that you hear this. So, the answer is Brian Hunt of Moonlight Brewing Company in Fulton, California. But that was with
Redwood Tips.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was terrific. And if you were to drink that beer, you wouldn't know that there weren't hops in it. Although once he told you there weren't hops in it, then you go, okay, I get it. But just as a casual pint of beer, you'd never know.
Yeah, and that's brewing along the theory of what do hops taste like? Mm-hmm. Well, what else tastes like hops? Mm-hmm. Let's use that. Which goes along these same lines as well.
Yeah.
Well, what I like about this experiment is that it kind of gives homebrewers a little more freedom to think, to coin a phrase, outside the box. But, that it's supposed to be fun, and that we get so hung up on, replicating a recipe and trying to brew either for competition or quasi for competition. Mm-hmm. And we're not thinking about, wow, this is just fun, and I want to see what this tastes like. And I think that that's an okay way to approach the hobby.
I couldn't agree more.
And back a few years ago, when you first started brewing, Andy, and when you first started the shop, people weren't thinking along these lines, were they?
Well, that's true. Everybody was really kind of focused on the traditional styles. But I'll be honest, back when I first started the shop, lots of people started with the Papazian book. And it was interesting to see people's brewing hobby evolve, because they almost all followed the same track. They'd try something fairly traditional, then they'd immediately go to something like the honey beer in there, or the cherry fever stout recipe. They'd try something that was with a twist on the traditional. So I see that it's actually something that I think everybody has this passion for, and everybody wants to come up with their own thing. And I think that's a big part of the hobby is being creative and putting your mark on something.
Starting from scratch. So what have we got here?
So the next beer is something that you could have found probably 500 years ago in Britain. It's brewed with my approximation of gruit, which is, it is one malt. It is a pale malt extract. This beer was a rainy Sunday afternoon beer that I had really done far, far too much reading for school, and I needed to do something that was not reading, so I looked around and tried to figure out what I could make. So I went online and looked up grew it, people's guesses on it, and then I looked up things like bog myrtle and bog myrtle substitution. And
which I guess is not probably one of the most popular searches on Google.
Apparently not. I did find 2 sites, incidentally, that had, however, bog myrtle and bog myrtle substitutions in modern beers. So, I mean, this is, in some ways, as straightforward a beer as you can make. It is pale malt extract. This was a small batch, 1 gallon. I think I had the rest of a bag of dry pale malt extract, a pound and a half, 2 pounds, somewhere in there. No steeping grains. I believe it was Chinook hops that I used. Again, I wasn't brave enough to just no hops this one. So I think a 1/4 ounce at 60 minutes and a 1/4 ounce at 30 minutes. But then I started to look around and figure out what I could do to get that spice profile they would have had back then. And so I actually put, I believe, 8 coriander seeds in at 30 minutes in the boil. A touch of cinnamon, just tapped it in the top. And then I went out and found wild rosemary. When I say wild rosemary, that's actually a different species than regular rosemary. This was probably regular rosemary just out in the wild. It was in someone's front yard. So I spent a lot of time running from house to house looking covertly and taking snips of things and then identifying them using Wikipedia when I got home.
Oh, this one's poison ivy.
Yeah. So after I got myself some Benadryl and I mean I only picked things I absolutely knew what they were. So I ended up with some wild rosemary, and then I used something else, a secret ingredient. It's only secret in so much as I cannot for the life of me remember what it is. It is something that you could buy at your regular grocery store. It comes in one of those regular little seasoning glass bottles. I want to say there's a dash. It's not oregano, but it's one of those kind of leafy kind of herbs.
So, what in that family? What do we have, Steve?
Yeah, marjoram, thyme.
It was one of the unusual ones, though, that I had for a special project. So anyway, I know it wasn't oregano, and the reason I know that is that the beer smells. The last time I had it, about a month and a half ago, smells like pizza, like baking pizza, and it doesn't have any of the ingredients other than barley, which would have at one point barley flour could have been used, and yeast. There's nothing. The yeast, however, is partially wild. I let it sit for about a day, just hanging out, and then I put bread yeast in to really kick up the fermentation. So you won't see because you're listening to a radio podcast, but at the bottom there's every time I move, you can see that the yeast kind of puffs up and comes back down because it doesn't have the flocculation factor that a lot of them do. So.
Well, I'm glad it's not a red stripe that's 11 years old.
Yes. Yeah, this is only about 6 months old.
The inside joke is that he bottled it in a red stripe bottle. And I was a little worried.
So I did use regular old priming sugar to get the carbonation up in this. I mean, there would have been some carbonated beers. They would have been held in barrels, anything to build up some pressure, but...
And it does have a good amount of carbonation.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a what would we call it? Pale amber, maybe. And you used extract for these, and
I did.
A lot of people look down on extract, but you can still have a lot of fun with extract.
Absolutely. So far I do mostly extract brewing for space reasons, for time reasons. I'm a graduate school student, so. One might make the cost argument, and I plan on switching over to all grain, but I sold almost all of my brewing equipment in California to make the big drive, and I'm getting some ideas from Andy's store. So I think next I'm going to switch over to all grain.
I get a kind of almost a wheat beer note on the nose, almost like it's got some of the wheat beer yeast phenolics going on.
Yeah. I'm getting a kind of lemon that I definitely didn't get last time I had this. Lemon grass, not like lemon peel.
Yeah, I'm getting. We grilled one of those, prepackaged pork loins the other night, and it had seasoning on it. And I think there's some of the same seasoning. This just reminds me of that pork loin, and it would pair very well with that pork loin as well.
One of the really fun things about brewing things that you grab from around the house, which is a game we're going to be playing in just a matter of minutes, is what the heck did I put in this? And you drink it and go, I think I'm getting coffee. I remember coffee. I remember putting coffee in. Hooray!
Well, I'm almost getting a little bit of smoke. Just a teeny tiny
In the aroma or in the flavor?
Maybe a little of both.
I don't know what I think about this. I mean, it's very complicated beer to me. So, I mean, I'm getting kind of some bready things, but everything else you guys have said, I'm nodding my head, believe it or not. And I don't know. It's pretty good, but my first sip of it, I went, ooh.
Yeah, that's what you, I think, how all of us would feel if we got a bottle from 500 years ago, we would think more than ooh. But back then, you didn't know what you were getting. When you opened, especially if it was bottled in some form, you had no idea. And the way I feel about this is I've got one bottle left of this, and I'll probably drink it in a month or two. It was an experiment. This was just what I was talking about before, where I won't brew this again because, well, I won't have 6-month-old Chinook hops sitting around, hopefully. But it's just, it was what it was, and it's fun to try and say, what would I pair this with? You know, if you tasted it and said, oh, we've got this great pork chop that I know the flavor and profile of, and...
Yep.
I think it has the back end is the bitterness is a little harsh. I'd probably back off a little on the Chinook hops.
Yeah.
Chinook hops are known for producing kind of a harsh bitterness.
Yeah.
So you might try switching to one of the other varieties of bittering hop. Something with a little less of a harsh profile. I'm no expert, so I don't know whether it's the cohumulone level or whatever it is in the hops that make it more smooth bitterness than others. But and I can hook you up with some really old Chinook if you want.
Yeah. Well, next time when I have a different old hop sitting in my fridge that I think, good Lord, I need to use this before it turns any grayer. These were not gray. These were actually still green. I freeze-dried them and everything. But, next time I have one of those experiences, it probably won't be Chinook.
Well, and this is a perfect example of why small batches are fun to play with. I think this is pretty good. I mean, it's very unusual, but I've got an adventurous attitude toward the whole thing.
As this is opening up some in the air, I'm getting a lot more herbal notes. It seems to be related a little bit to Benedictine, which I'm addicted to, and so it has that kind of 500-year-old monks made this.
Huh.
The first hard liquor I ever had was Gammeldansk. I was living in Denmark at the time, and we don't really even have a word for it in English. We call it bitters, but you drink it by itself, and it just, your first sip of it, it's all over the map. You have no idea what to do with this thing. It's a very proprietary recipe. We've only identified 3 of the herbs they use concretely. So that's kind of how I feel about this, that I bet there's someone out there in this world who would take a sip of this and say, yes, this is the beer for me. I'm a wacko and I like strange brews. It's not quite my beer.
The only thing that I would knock on it is it's a little thin, and I think that's probably attributed to the bread yeast.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's... I don't get any kind of infection taste out of the bread yeast or anything.
And the fact that I left it for a day without pitching just goes to show that it's not always detrimental. It could have been, but as I said, I was sitting in 2 growlers on my floor just relaxing. Bobby actually tried this one here since he had never tried this one before. Do you have any comments on it?
Everything that's been said already.
And what's your last name, Bobby, by the way?
Mattina. Bobby Mattina.
He's being drawn in by the beers.
That's all right.
But he's having very small samples.
Imagine drinking a very light pale ale, very low hopped, and sucking on a Ricola. All at the same time.
I can imagine that. I'm trying to imagine the situation in which that would come up, however, which is all the more entertaining.
And depending on the time of year, you might be doing that, actually, right now. Beer number 3.
Yes. So this one, we're going to be playing that game. What did Ricky put in it? I remember some of them, and while we were driving this morning, Bobby was writing down what I remembered putting in it. But the nice thing is, since it was a fairly stressful time in my life and all that, you guys could probably recommend things, and I will agree. So anything you say you taste or smell in this beer, actually it's a Methylene Braggot, you're probably correct. So this one... it's a very, very, very little bit of carbonation, and almost all of that is just I bottled it after 4 months in the carboy, and it was still eating through some of those sugars. Huh. So
what's the base?
The base is, hold on, I will pour these out and then try to figure it out.
It's pouring. It's a fairly clear beer, but it's a kind of a brown.
Yep. So it's something like 7 pounds. No, it's 6 pounds of honey, 5 pounds of dark malt extract. Nope. Change that again. 2 pounds of dark malt, 3 pounds of amber malt extract.
Well, I'm hit with the honey right off the beginning.
I'm hit with the honey, but I'm also hit with chilies. I get a really spicy. The first thing I thought of was like a chili beer.
Or our Ancho Chili Mead. Yeah, yep. I can get that.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's heather honey, which is a little bit darker than some of the other varieties from what I've been told. And the things I know are in it. Heather tips, full 2 ounces, actually. It's a 5-gallon batch. I did the bourbon-soaked coffee beans, which was a recommended technique, and actually 2 tablespoons of straight vanilla extract. That went into the primary fermenter.
And no hops?
No hops.
Wow. Well, it's very smooth. And how long has it been in the bottle?
Now, this has been in the bottle, I brewed in, I want to say March, maybe February. This is late February. And however long it's been between now, which is the very end of June, and the very end of February. Someone else can do the math for me.
Wow. What do you think, Annie?
I get some kind of almost Venus kind of grapiness, like sometimes you get from ports and stuff. It's very interesting. A little hot. There's obviously got a lot of alcohol in it. So.
Yeah. 11.8% by volume. A lot of alcohol. And as I said, this is my 2010 Christmas brew, so this is years off from where I'm really expecting it to all come together, and I have a box that I plan on laying down for 5 years, which is a big deal when you're 24,
So did you talk about the yeast?
The yeast is, I believe I used a Scottish ale yeast, pushing it right to its limit of where it can survive in alcohol, which is probably why it got to those last sugars the very little bit in bottle. I basically bottled this when I had to hit the road in May.
So it's a little hot, but not. It's not distractingly hot, I don't think. No. If anything, the alcohol kind of adds to that perception of the chili that you were talking about earlier, Steve.
Definitely. I know what you're talking about. A kind of a pepper smell. I almost get almost a fresh pepper, kind of like a green pepper, or not quite a green pepper, but
so there's a little vegetal thing going,
which kind of goes back to the whole wine. I sometimes get that in some deep red wines, especially European ones.
Sure, maybe I put some pepper in it.
This would be another good candidate for the ice beer technique.
Yes, I planned on doing that as well at some point. It had cinnamon in it for sure. And cloves. I know I put cloves in it, but I put whole cloves cracked. I just pounded them once and dropped them in to the primary.
So, Steve, are you getting spices?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, they're all really subtle, but every time you had mentioned clove, oh yeah, there's clove in that. It's just there's a lot of stuff going on in here, and I think you're right. It will be way good in about 5 years if you leave it alone. It's pretty good now, but it's a little out of balance. But that's okay, and leave it alone. And then also, I see Andy's warming his up, so I'm curious to see how it opens up as it warms and breathes a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that I could drink a whole pint.
This is definitely for a sherry glass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually really like brewing things that aren't intended for that because I do session beers. I made that Dandelion Kolsch. I make, I do APAs, things like that. But I get into things for special occasions. I think there's that big fight in the brewing world. Do you brew to style or do you brew to occasion? And I try to do both. This is my 2010 Christmas beer. Doesn't matter it's not a beer. It doesn't matter, what else goes into it. Yep. It was intended for that occasion.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we were talking to Sean Paxton about. You plan ahead for an event, and you just like you prepare a meal for an event, you can plan ahead a beer for an event as well. It takes a lot more planning.
Yes.
You can't just run down to the store and get the ingredients and be done by that evening. But if it's a very special thing like a Christmas, years in the future, this is the thing to do. Have you tasted it over time?
Yeah, I've had 2 bottles. I half-filled 2 bottles at the end. We did one of those it looks like it's done, capped it, and then realized we hadn't tipped the bottling bucket and got another half beer. So, and those were markedly different than what we're tasting here because of all that oxygen in the bottle. Those hot notes that we're tasting now were practically gone. It didn't have a papery oxidation because I think the alcohol level at this point would prevent that, but it tasted like I'm anticipating it tasting in about 2 years or so. They had been in the bottle in the fridge for a month and a half like that.
Do you remember or did you talk about, or do you remember the quantities of the spices that you put in, and where did you put them in the process?
So I had actually whole cinnamon sticks and tossed them in at flame out during cool. I was reading online, and that was how people had found they got the most out of those. But then I got them into the brew kettle also. So they were in flame out. They were in primary fermentation into the carboy. So I had those in. The coffee beans I soaked overnight in bourbon and dumped the whole lot of it. It was, I think, 10 beans in a quarter cup bourbon maybe. And of the other spices...
Were the beans cracked or were they whole?
They were whole.
Okay.
I considered cracking them, and then something happened. The phone rang. So then the vanilla went into primary. Tasting it now, well, I guess when I taste it in a little while, I really like those vanilla notes in a really heavy beer, and I'm thinking maybe secondary would have been better for something like that. I'm afraid some of the yeast stripped that, but this thing is not lacking in complexity or spice notes.
No.
I would say if you want to increase the vanilla notes, you probably ought to maybe switch to bean, and a bean you could soak in a secondary, and then pull out once you got the taste the way you wanted it, So, but the other thing that might be a nice addition to this beer would have been like some oak. Did you do any oak? I don't taste any, but it tends to add that vanilla character too.
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the things I was going to say. Next time I do a beer like this, I hope to either do oak chips or at that point get myself one of those little 5-gallon wood barrels. And I was thinking exactly that a minute ago. As soon as it hit my tongue, that component would be great for this.
I also think a little smoke would be great for it. A little smoked malt, a little smoked specialty grain.
As it's warming up, I think this is a beverage well suited for room temperature, because as it's opening up, now I'm getting a lot more of the spices and both the smelling and tasting it as well. Whereas before I wasn't. I was just getting more of the kind of mellow, darker notes. This is delicious. So what's next on the horizon? I mean, once you get settled wherever you're going to settle, what other experiments do you have on your back burner?
Well, the big excitement for my life would be being in the same building, living there for 9 months in a row. I remember the last time that was, but I don't think I was in college yet. So once I am that settled, I'm going to move over to all grain, though I'm sure I'll keep doing extract because they're quick and fun. I haven't really thought out the experiments because almost all of these, with the exception of the one we're drinking right now, was I'm bored beer, which is usually a lot of people's answer in this country, but it usually isn't making beer, it's acquiring beer. So that's, if it's not that, I just cook something for a couple hours.
Well, this is delicious. One more question. How do you treat the honey? Where do you add the honey if you're making a braggot or something that's a meld between the two?
One important thing to mention that I didn't, and I meant to, I'm glad you reminded me, is that this was only brought to pasteurization temperature. You can't do that with an all grain, of course. But with malt extract, theoretically, they have gotten out a lot of those things that require boiling. And I wasn't using hops, so it didn't matter. So I brought it up to 170 degrees, and I put everything in at about 120. Just, it blends easier. There was no reason to put it in cold. So
this wasn't even boiled?
No, this was brought up to 170 and then cooled.
Now, that's interesting. That's truly a no-boil beer. And with the spices and since you weren't isomerizing alpha acids, you didn't need to be boiling anything. So that's another fun idea as well. I mean, that's a really short brew day.
Yeah.
Were there any challenges with these beers that if you were to do them again, you would change your process?
I would probably think about what I was doing, which would be a big change rather than throwing open the spice cabinet and yelling to my girlfriend, Kelly, do you know where the blank is? And if we don't have it, just not putting it in. I might actually write down a recipe. For the second beer we tried tonight, I don't even have hydrometer readings for it. I saw no reason to do that because if I was aiming for beer from 500 years ago, they would have had no idea. My guess, given the quantities and doing some quick math, is it came out to about 4.5%. But the heck if I know. I don't know the utilization in bread yeast.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fun, as I suspected. I appreciate you guys dropping by on your way across country. And you wanted to plug your website.
I do. I run a website called realphilosophy.net, and we publish new philosophy papers, less of people discussing what Aristotle meant by catharsis and more of things like what role does alcohol play in our modern culture, things like that. And we have no beer articles up there now, so come online and submit.
Awesome. I appreciate your beers and your time, Ricky. And thanks for driving, Bobby.
Oh, no problem. Glad I could be here.
Thanks, Ricky.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Ricky for dropping by and to Bobby for driving. And thanks to Ricky for being patient while I ran all the material from California from the Homebrew Conference. Recorded that a long time ago, and I hadn't listened to it since then. Enjoyed it. A lot of fun. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our homebrewing DVDs, Introduction to Extract Homebrewing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. And if you go to our site, basicbrewingshop.com, there may be a brewer's logbook, a brewer's logbook or two left out on the site. So go to basicbrewingshop.com to find out. We got combo deals on there to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. You can also see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order those DVDs online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. And I'll pack them up myself along with any shirts that you may want to order as well. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are the Great Arizona Orphan Abduction. Wasn't that a Frank Zappa song? No, that was something else. And Norpro Meat Pounder. You bought that just so I'd say it, didn't you? Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we appreciate your support. Don't forget that you can also join the American Homebrewers Association through an associate link on the basicbrewing.com site now. And also, you can subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine. So thanks very much to everybody who's done that. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.